Hi, good morning. My name is Kriti Monga, and I'm one of the facilitators here at Reset Learning. Thank you for joining today's information session on dyslexia. We're going to go through what dyslexia is, whether it's considered a learning disability, and the process of getting diagnosed. Hi, so what is dyslexia? Dyslexia is a developmental language-based learning disability. It affects an individual's ability to read, spell, and recognize words. Although there is no certain cause for why dyslexia exists in certain individuals, it appears to be linked to certain genes that affect how the brain functions and processes reading and language. Dyslexia is identified and categorized as a lifelong neurobiological condition, which basically means that it's rooted in the individual differences in brain structure and function. Here in the image we have, it shows the basic main differences between a neurotypical brain and a brain with dyslexia. As we can see, the orange or the red parts that are in the front are the Broca's area, which are mainly related to speech production and articulation, and it's active in both brains. Although different, it is still active in both brains. In contrast to this, however, the parieto-temporal and the occipito-temporal areas of the brain are only active in the neurotypical brain. These two areas are responsible for distinguishing between left and right, mathematical functions, writing, memory, and word recognition, which is why in dyslexic individuals, they have difficulty with certain skills like this. So what can dyslexia look like? There are a lot of misconceptions and myths that surround dyslexia, especially nowadays with an increase in conversation about mental illnesses and social media. There are a lot of misconceptions that go around quite frequently. So some of them are, for example, people believe that dyslexia is related to low intelligence or that individuals are simply lazy, which is not true, of course. People also believe that dyslexia can be outgrown. Another thing is that a lot of individuals very often think that dyslexia is purely comprised of letters being reversed. So when you look at a word, it just looks inversed or it looks mirrored, which is not the case as well. In reality, dyslexia can look very different for each individual, and I have a video here that will give us some further insight into what dyslexia can truly look like.
This is what dyslexia looks like. If you have or suspect dyslexia in yourself or in somebody that you love, they will probably have some sort of difficulty with spelling. They might be able to spell okay, but they will probably ask you or Siri or Alexa, how do you spell aluminum? How do you spell the word thorough or though? They might get confused on similar words like county and country. They will probably have a hard time hearing the difference between I and in reading and in writing. They might have a hard time reading words that they've never seen before, and it may take them longer to read a passage and understand it. Here's the main thing, especially in our younger dyslexic students. Their writing does not reflect their intelligence. They write words that they know how to say instead of words that they would rather use but they don't know how to spell. Dyslexia also looks like extreme creativity, exceptionally gifted in many areas like music, art, athletics. They are very people. They're great with others. They think outside of the box. They're amazing leaders. And they have so many beautiful gifts and talents that the rest of us simply wish we had.
So as this creator, who is April McCartney on TikTok, she talks a lot about dyslexia in younger children and older individuals and how it can look different for everyone, different skills and different techniques that people can use in order to overcome the struggles that they face. As she mentioned, younger children often struggle with skills like letter sound association. So that is basically when, for example, if you ask a child who has dyslexia to write down the word cat, they might write down K-A-T in place of C-A-T, because when you think about it, the letters K and C, both at some point in different words, have the sound K. Similarly, if you ask a child with dyslexia to write down the word water, when they hear the word water, they might think that the spelling of it would be W-A-T-U-R because of the way that it's pronounced. Along with letter sound association, there are also early literacy tasks that children with dyslexia might have trouble with. So that includes phonetical awareness, reading and writing, and also things like building your vocabulary, because they have trouble reading and understanding new words. Along with this, there's also fine motor skills that children with dyslexia would struggle with. In older individuals, there are higher issues with reading fluency, so the speed and accuracy with which they read, written expression, and spellings. Okay, so now let's talk about dyslexia as a diagnosis. So the DSM-5, just to give a bit of background, the DSM-5 is, the full form is the Digital and Statistical Manual for Mental Illnesses. And this is basically the APA, which is the American Psychiatric Association's professional reference book on all mental illnesses and brain-related conditions. So if you're ever curious about any brain-related conditions, mental illnesses, disabilities, or disorders, the DSM-5 would be where you would go to find out more about it. So according to the DSM-5, dyslexia is categorized as a specific learning disorder with an impairment in reading, specific to reading, writing, and skills of that sort. As outlined by the DSM-5, there are certain criteria and characteristics that a practitioner, psychologist, or clinician would keep in mind or use in order to perform a diagnosis or do an assessment. We're going to go through the list now. The first one is having difficulty in at least one of the following areas for a prolonged period of at least 6 months. So if you're having trouble, or if your sibling or a student in your class, for example, or yourself, if you're having trouble with reading skills, so as previously mentioned, slow reading or inaccuracies while you're reading, reading comprehension. So if you read a sentence, a word, or a paragraph, and you find yourself having difficulty understanding the meaning, or having to go over it over and over again to get a better understanding of what it is that the paragraph is saying. Spellings, grammar, phonetical processing, which was the letter-sound association that we talked about, or arithmetic functions like number concepts, facts, calculations, or mathematical reasoning. So if you're facing trouble with any of these areas for longer than 6 months, and you're still getting help to improve in these areas and it's not doing much to help you, that's something that a practitioner would keep in mind when they're performing an assessment. The second is that the academic skills of an individual are below that of the expected age level. So for example, if your sibling, a student in your class, or your child is, say, in grade 5, and you can notice that their reading or their math skills are maybe at a grade 3 level, that is something that would be pointed out or kept in mind when you talk to a practitioner about possibly getting a diagnosis. In order to test the academic skill level, there are different ways that you can go about doing that. The first would be using academic skill challenges, which would be like a set of questions related to word reading, comprehension, mathematical skills, basic, like an aptitude test. And the second would be a comprehensive clinical assessment conducted by a clinician or a clinical psychologist. The third would be difficulty starting at school age. So not all learning disabilities are diagnosed when kids are young. A lot of people get diagnosed when they're older, when they're in their 20s or even their 30s. And since you're not in school at that point, there are different ways in which you can be assessed. One of them, or one criteria that you can look at while being assessed, is if you had difficulty starting at a very young age when you were in school. So when you started reading in school, if you started having trouble then, as opposed to it slowly progressing and having issues later on in life, that would be a criteria to be diagnosed as well. And the last one is that the learning difficulty is not due to other conditions. So if, for example, during these assessments you're asked to read a certain text or write something, it shouldn't be that, say, the language in which the assessment is taking place is not a language that you're strong in. It's not your first language or a language you're comfortable in. Also, it shouldn't be that there are external factors such as a different neurological diagnosis or intellectual disability, for example, autism, or a TBI, for example, traumatic brain injury, that would impede an individual's ability to perform in these assessments. If you'd like to know more about the DSM-5 and the information that they have about dyslexia or other learning disorders, I have linked their website here right at the bottom. Okay, now in order to get diagnosed, or in order to get a diagnosis, you have to be assessed. And an assessment can take place in a variety of different ways. But usually it's a combination of a few techniques like observation, interviews, family history, and school reports. So an observation would be if you observed that your child, sibling, yourself, or say a student in your class, you've noticed that they are not performing at the level that the rest of their classes, or you feel like they might be able to get diagnosed for dyslexia, you would have a clinician or a school psychologist, for example, come into their classroom and perform an observation in order to see how they're performing in actual time in their classes. An interview would be when a clinician or psychologist would sit down with the individual being diagnosed and talk to them about how they're doing, perform an in-person assessment of, say, the writing and reading skills, family history. So like we mentioned earlier, dyslexia does run in family genes. And so having an understanding of family history and whether this has happened in the past or somebody else in the family is diagnosed would also help clinicians get a better idea of how to go about the diagnosis. And lastly is school reports. So if a teacher reports that a student is having difficulty for a prolonged period of time, the school reports that are provided by the teacher would also be helpful in the assessment. So neuropsychological testing, for example, neuropsychological testing is basically like an aptitude test, but it goes through different skills that you would test for someone with dyslexia. So word decoding, reading skills, reading comprehension, phonetical awareness, these would be tested in a neuropsychological testing assessment. And these are the best ways to find different techniques that would help an individual with a specific learning disorder. Lastly, in place of a standardized assessment, especially for individuals who are over the age of 17, a documented history of learning impairment. So for example, the school report. So if you have a school report from your entire academic journey from grade 1 all the way to grade 12 that outlines how you have faced struggles in every single class from then on, and you're getting diagnosed later on in life, that school report would be helpful in getting diagnosed in place of an assessment as well. Although there is no specific cure for learning disorders like dyslexia, there are different ways in which there are strategies and techniques that students can use or individuals can use to manage their symptoms successfully. So here at Reset, our facilitators spend a lot of time and effort in understanding and knowing how to best support our learners with dyslexia. We have a holistic approach here, which enables learners to overcome their challenges and achieve lasting improvement through development of critical thinking skills and habit creation. We also strongly emphasize neuroplasticity and the brain's ability to constantly adapt, change, and grow. Specifically with our learners with dyslexia, through our programs that focus on the brain's ability to have neuroplasticity, we're able to help our learners improve reading fluency and comprehension skills. Lastly, we have a learner-centered program here at Reset. All of our programs are designed to help provide learners with the tools to help them gain confidence in their skills, abilities, and create a larger sense of self-awareness. I'd like to specifically point out two of our programs here at Reset, the core program Level 1 and Level 2. Both of these programs focus on the gradual skill building and introduces reading strategies and tools that individuals can learn on a step-by-step basis. This allows learners to build skills at their own pace, keeping in mind where they're currently at, how they're progressing, and going from there in order to improve their skill sets. And these are the references that I have used and all the data that I collected for the presentation or for the session today. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask in the chat or to send me an email, and I'll be happy to answer.
Also, don't forget to get your participation certificate. Just send us a mail to the info mail that is showing the screen. Thank you so much for joining this session.